It began on a rainy Thursday, the kind that made everything feel slower and heavier. Jonas had just finished unloading a set of windows when Clara walked into the warehouse, clipboard in hand, her hair pulled back neatly, droplets clinging to her coat. She wasn't flashy, just grace wrapped in quiet authority. But when their eyes met, something shifted. Jonas didn't know what it was then, only that her gaze lingered a moment too long. He told himself she was just being polite, but her soft, "thank you," brushed against something in him he didn't know was still alive. From that day, he found himself watching her from a distance, how she moved, how she tucked her hair behind her ear, how she seemed lonely even in a room full of people. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something forbidden, undeniable. And the way her eyes found him more often? It told him she felt it too. Neither of them said a word. But in silence, something dangerous had already begun. Before Clara, Jonas's life was quiet, predictable, and achingly dull. He worked long hours lifting glass panes and scraping calluses from his palms, then came home to the small room above Doreen's bakery, where the scent of cinnamon and old wood filled the silence. He didn't dream big. He didn't dream at all. His parents had drifted out of his life years ago, and friendships faded with time. Most nights were spent listening to the hum of the city below, eating day-old pastries, and wondering if this was all there was. His world was practical, not poetic, until Clara. She didn't just enter his life, she cracked it open. Before her, he never questioned if he was lonely. Now, every glance, every breath near her made him realize how numb he'd been. She wasn't just a woman, she was a mirror, reflecting everything he didn't know he craved. And once he saw that, there was no turning back. Clara moved like a secret, graceful, quiet, always composed. She wore neutral tones and soft scarves, her voice low but firm, her eyes carrying a weight Jonas couldn't quite name. In the break room, she'd stir her tea slowly, lost in thought, as if her mind lived in places no one else could reach. There was a sadness to her that drew Jonas in, something unspoken in the way she avoided Reed's touch during company lunches or how she smiled politely but never laughed. To the others, she was just the boss's wife, the efficient office manager. But to Jonas, she was something else entirely. There was warmth buried beneath her reserve, flickering like a candle behind glass. He found himself noticing the curve of her wrist, the way she bit her lip when concentrating, the sudden softness when she spoke his name. She didn't flirt. She didn't need to. Her very presence made the air feel heavier, and for Jonas, unbearably magnetic. It started with glances, but whispers soon followed. Ben, ever the observer, nudged Jonas one afternoon, smirking. "Careful, man. Clara's got that quiet fire. Burns without warning." Jonas laughed it off, but his heart beat faster. Around the warehouse, conversations hushed when Clara passed by, eyes flicked between her and Jonas with curious suspicion. Reed remained distant as always, but Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that something in the air had shifted. Tasks became tense. Clara stopped assigning Jonas directly, going through others, but her eyes still found him across rooms. The space between them filled with what couldn't be said. Even Doreen noticed the weight Jonas carried. "You look like a boy carrying a storm in his pocket," she said gently, handing him a warm bun. Jonas tried to focus on work, to bury the ache under routines, but temptation, once awakened, doesn't sleep easily. And every step he took near Clara made the whispers feel louder. The rain returned like a familiar song, steady, soft, and constant. It was on one such day that Clara found Jonas alone in the storage shed, wiping down tools. She didn't say much, just stood in the doorway, her coat soaked, eyes thoughtful. Jonas offered her a towel, their fingers brushed, and time seemed to stutter. "You always stay late," she murmured, voice almost lost in the rain's rhythm. "So do you," he replied, not looking up. The silence between them was thick, but not uncomfortable. It was full, of things unsaid, of glances too long, of shared loneliness. That evening, she sat beside him on an overturned crate, and they listened to the rain tap on the tin roof. No flirtation, no promises, just presence. And yet, something deeper passed between them than words ever could. In the quiet rhythm of raindrops and breathing, Jonas felt something shift. The bond had grown, not in declarations, but in the comfort of being seen without needing to speak. It wasn't grand declarations that pulled Jonas and Clara closer, it was the quiet, deliberate gestures that no one else noticed. A second coffee placed beside his mug in the break room, no note, just warm and exactly how he liked it. A pen returned to his desk that he didn't realize he had lost. A folded paper towel she left when he nicked his hand on a frame, small things, trivial to others, but to Jonas, they meant everything. He responded in kind. A door held a little longer, a machine fixed without being asked, a passing compliment that was more truth than flattery, "You make this place less cold." Clara never acknowledged it directly, but he saw the way her shoulders softened, the way she lingered a second longer in his presence. Even Ben noticed. "You two talk like people who don't need to talk," he said one afternoon, narrowing his eyes at Jonas. Jonas just nodded. He couldn't explain it. These weren't flirtations, they were lifelines in a world where both had been drifting too long. The tension was no longer just in touches or looks, it was in the growing weight of what their silences meant. Every kind gesture, every glance, was a pebble thrown into the still water of their restraint, creating ripples that threatened to break the surface. The line between care and longing was growing thinner by the day. And neither of them seemed ready, or willing, to stop. It happened late one evening, long after the others had gone home. Jonas was finishing up paperwork when Clara entered the office, her hair slightly undone, eyes tired but steady. She stood silently for a moment, then closed the door behind her. "I can't keep pretending," she whispered, her voice trembling, not with fear, but release. Jonas's breath caught. He didn't move. "Every day I tell myself it's nothing. That I'm your boss's wife. That this is wrong. But you look at me like I still matter." Jonas stepped closer, his voice low. "You do matter. To me, you do." For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. Clara's eyes glistened with emotion held back for years. She reached for his hand, not a kiss, not a rush, just touch. Honest. Raw. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she said. "But it did," Jonas replied. And in that quiet office, under dim lights and the hum of a tired ceiling fan, they crossed a line neither could uncross, no longer just gestures, but truth laid bare. It happened not with fireworks or music, but in the quiet aftermath of something unspoken finally breaking free. The rain had returned again, gentle, steady, like a familiar pulse. Jonas had stayed late, finishing up a delivery report Clara had asked for. He hadn't expected her to still be there. But she was, standing by the window, arms folded, watching the water beat against the glass. Her reflection was soft, blurred by the droplets, but there was something different in her posture. A kind of surrender. Jonas hesitated at the doorway. "You should be home," he said gently. She didn't turn around. Home stopped feeling like home a long time ago. He stepped closer, unsure of the ground beneath him. The room was filled with the scent of rain and paper and something intangible, hope or danger, maybe both. She finally turned, eyes locking onto his. "Do you think we're terrible people?" she asked, her voice breaking at the edges. Jonas shook his head. "No. Just lonely ones." That was all it took. She closed the distance slowly, cautiously, like a woman touching something sacred. Her hand brushed his chest first, a trembling touch that seemed to ask for permission. Jonas didn't move, not out of hesitation, but reverence. Clara's lips met his with surprising softness, not hunger. It was a kiss filled with everything they couldn't say during the workday, everything they buried under professional nods and stolen glances. Her fingers slid up to his jaw as he deepened the kiss, pulling her gently closer. Time unraveled. For a moment, nothing existed but the heat of her mouth, the way her body fit against his, the storm outside echoing the storm inside. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and wide-eyed, neither spoke. They didn't need to. That single kiss carried months of silence, aching glances, and unmet longing. It wasn't lust, it was release. It was the dam breaking. And though both knew it would change everything, neither of them wanted to take it back. The morning after, everything looked the same, but nothing felt it. Jonas walked into work with steady hands and a storm behind his eyes. Clara avoided his gaze during the team meeting, but he felt her presence like heat on his skin. The kiss lingered between them, an invisible thread pulling tight with every stolen glance. They spoke only in brief, neutral phrases, nothing suspicious, yet too careful. Ben raised an eyebrow at Jonas during lunch. "You seem distracted." Jonas just shrugged, forcing a smile. But Doreen noticed too. That evening, as she handed him a warm bun, she said softly, "Some truths weigh heavier when they're hidden." Clara and Jonas became experts at silence. A brush of hands when no one was looking. A late-night text with no words, just a, that said everything. The secrecy was necessary, but exhausting. Every day was a balancing act between desire and discretion. And every night, Jonas lay awake, wondering how long they could carry a love the world wasn't supposed to see. It happened quietly, like most disasters do. One evening, Jonas stayed late again, too late. Clara had just slipped out of his office, her perfume still hanging in the air, when Reed walked in unexpectedly. He didn't yell. Didn't rage. He just stood there, eyes scanning the room, landing on the half-finished tea mug, Clara's favorite. His voice was cold, almost calm. "She was here?" Jonas froze. "Just going over inventory." Reed didn't respond. He stepped closer, picked up the mug, and stared at it for a long moment. Then, softly, "Do you think I'm blind, Jonas?" Jonas tried to speak, but the words failed him. Reed set the mug down and nodded once, like he'd made peace with something unbearable. "You can't lie to someone who stopped being in love years ago. But betrayal, that's something else." Then he walked out, no fury, no threats. Just devastation in silence. And that silence hurt more than any punch ever could. The days that followed felt hollow. Reed didn't fire Jonas, didn't confront Clara, not directly. Instead, he withdrew completely. Instructions came through Ben now. Meetings were cancelled. The once lively office turned brittle with tension. Clara moved like a ghost through the hallways, her eyes tired, her voice even quieter than before. Jonas felt the weight of it all pressed down, on his chest, in his sleep, between every breath. The stolen moments with Clara vanished. No more late nights. No more lingering touches. Just distance. Cold, necessary distance. Ben said nothing, but his silence was heavy with understanding. Doreen noticed the slump in Jonas's shoulders, the dark under his eyes. One evening, she placed a cup of tea beside him and said gently, "Love that wounds doesn't always mean it wasn't real." Jonas nodded, eyes burning. The fallout hadn't come in flames, it came in stillness, in spaces once filled with longing now echoing with regret. And for the first time, he didn't know what to do next. Jonas packed lightly, just a duffel bag, his tools, and the worn photo of his younger self his mother once gave him. There was no dramatic goodbye, no final embrace. Just quiet steps down the bakery stairs as dawn crept in. Doreen met him at the door, holding a paper bag. "Cinnamon buns." "Still warm," she said, eyes soft. "You'll need sweetness where you're going." He nodded, unable to speak. Clara hadn't called. hadn't tried to stop him. Maybe she understood. Maybe she was letting him go the only way she could. On the bus, Jonas sat by the window, watching the familiar streets blur into distance. An elderly woman sat beside him, knitting quietly, her presence oddly comforting. He clutched the bag on his lap, the smell of cinnamon grounding him. As the city faded behind him, Jonas didn't know where he was headed, just that he couldn't stay. Love had given him something real, but also something broken. Now, all he had was the road, and the silence to figure out who he'd become. In a quiet town miles away, Jonas started over. A small glass repair shop took him in, no questions asked. He worked with his hands, kept his head down, and slowly began to breathe again. But Clara never left him. Not in the way her voice echoed when he stood alone, or the way her touch lingered in dreams. She was a part of him now, not as regret, but as a reminder. He'd loved her. Truly. But love alone isn't always enough. Jonas learned that desire can be beautiful and blinding, that morality isn't always black and white, and that honesty sometimes costs more than lies. Yet still, he wouldn't erase what they had. It taught him to feel, to choose, to face himself in the mirror without flinching. One evening, watching the sunset from his porch, Jonas smiled faintly. Not because he'd moved on, but because he'd survived with his soul intact. In loving Clara, he'd lost something, but he'd also found the courage to finally live truthfully.